Good afternoon, and welcome to the next installment of the International Meditation Hour. My name is Dr. Baruti KMT-Sisouvong, and I have the honor of welcoming the abbot for the Cambridge Zen Center, Mr. John Kolwaite. So today we're going to, as usual, have a discussion between Abbot Kolwaite and myself. We will then have our usual 20-minute meditation, which I call an all traditions meditation. We will then have a Q&A session to follow up thereafter. I have some questions for Abbot Kolwaite, and those of you who are in attendance may also place questions in the chat, and we'll pose those questions to Abbot Kolwaite as well. So again, thank you for joining us today for the International Meditation Hour. Should be a fun discussion. John Kolwaite became abbot of the Zen Center in January 2024. Prior to assuming the position, he served for 2 years as head Dharma teacher and remains a member of the center's board of trustees. His professional background consists of being a licensed special educator, a teacher, and administrator. His work focused primarily on children on the autism spectrum. He retired after approximately 29 years of service. For me, this is interesting and very noteworthy because it suggests a lifetime devoted to supporting human development long before becoming an abbot. He began meditating in 1990. In 1993, he met Zen master Sahn and began practicing with both the Providence and Cambridge Zen Centers. What stands out for me is the time scale. He began meditating in 1990. He met Master Sahn in 1993 and then became abbot in 2024. And when you take a look at the timeline, that represents more than 3 decades of practice before assuming the center's highest leadership. He's also a parent. He and his wife have 3 children, and we'll be talking more about that in terms of being a parent and this path as well and what's involved here. But also wonderfully for me, when examining his life, it really highlights his progression in terms of leadership development. He's a practitioner, he's a long-term student, he's a resident and head Dharma teacher, and now he's an abbot of the Cambridge Zen Center. So rather than highlighting a sudden appointment, the role seems to have emerged from decades of practice, service, and community involvement. And with that, I'd like to welcome Abbot John Kolwaite from the Cambridge Zen Center to the International Meditation Hour. So thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Brody, and all who are interested in this kind of discussion. And it's an honor to be here. I'm really excited. So yeah, thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure. I mean, we had an opportunity to meet just to give everyone a bit of backstory. Now, do we refer to you as Abbot Kolwaite or Abbot John? Which do you prefer?
They at the Zen Center they call me Abbot John.
Abbot John. There we go,
Yeah.
Abbot John. So, Abbot John, we met when we both had the opportunity to attend the Conscious Future Society conference that was being hosted by the Dharma Circle from Babson College that was held here in Boston. And it was a great experience. It was a wonderful Saturday, and it happened to be on the same date, my anniversary, 18th anniversary of learning transcendental meditation. And so we had a wonderful time. There was a great group of people that were there, and you and I connected immediately. And then, as nature would have it, we followed up and saw one another the following month at the Future Research on Meditation conference that was held here. And Matthew Sackett from Harvard had a chance to
Mhm.
give the keynote address, and we had a chance to connect there as well. So, what I'd like to do is to just have an informal conversation about your journey and just this life of one, meditation, two, of service, and three, of being involved within the community and what that means for you as Abbot John at the Cambridge Zen Center and being out in the community. So tell us a little bit more about yourself that perhaps I don't know, and we'll take it from there.
All right. Well, that's a big topic. So yeah, being the abbot is an interesting title because when I used to read a lot of books about meditation or Zen or Buddhism, they'd always say the abbot of so and so monastery, the abbot of this and that monastery, and typically that abbot was an enlightened Zen master who people would go to for spiritual guidance and kind of had the final word on how that worked. As abbot of Cambridge Zen Center, a lot of it's an administrative role. And so we have Zen masters or teachers of more experience in our school, the Quantum School of Zen, that guide and assist, the bigger questions of spirituality and practice. So I make sure the plumbing works, the electricity stays on, and the dryers and the washing machines work. But I'm also a Dharma teacher, so I do meditation instruction classes. We have lots of visitors at the Cambridge Zen Center from various colleges and groups, and I will lead those groups in a real basics about our practice in the Korean Zen form. But my
Mhm.
journey began when I was very young. Probably a lot of people are familiar with the story of a deep questioning, why am I supposed to do what you're asking me to do? And so when I was 16, I had this profound, I call it a vision. I use these words loosely. For me, a vision is a dream
Mm,
that when you awaken from it, you are changed in some way and your behavior becomes different. And so
mm,
I've had a few of these. I don't know if I would tell this to a psychologist, they might have a different path for me to pursue. But one of them I had when I was 16, and there's all this pressure about being choosing a career and studying hard and getting a job and all that kind of stuff. And somehow that just didn't stick. I couldn't see the point. And I had this vision of myself being very old and looking at all the roles I could possibly assume and seeing that they in this particular dream that they weren't going to fulfill me, that
mm,
there was something else
mm,
that I needed to do. And at that time, I was very confused. And I actually was raised in the Catholic tradition. And I went to a priest and I said, listen, because I asked my mom when I was young, like, why do people become priests? They don't have families, they have a vow of poverty. Why would you do that? And she's like, well, they get a calling from God. The normal things that the people want to do, they can't do. And I'm like, oh no. So I went to the priest, like, oh, geez, this happened to me, and I lost all interest in everything, and I don't know what to do with my life. And he's like, take it easy, take it easy. It doesn't mean you need to be a priest, and let this settle, and really be a deeper. It's called to be a deeper thinker about your life and what you're gonna do. So that stuck with me. And then when I got to college, I wasn't sure what to study. I dabbled in political science, and that disillusioned me profoundly. And then I was kind of wandering around and reading a lot of poetry, Walt Whitman, and different things. And I started to really investigate what is being. What is this experience of being an entity on this planet? Like, the big questions, like why am I here? What is this for? What is the tool I use to see what is here? Is it just my background? Is it my conditioning? Is it the books I've read? Is it things and what is this all about? And I kept talking to my friends about these big questions, and many people were really bothered by it. They're like, "Ah, shut up, you weirdo, and stop talking about that stuff." But I had one friend who was really intrigued, and she said, "You need to read this book." And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. I got tons of books to read." She kept pushing this book on me, and I finally said, "Okay, give me the book." And it was Ram Dass's Be Here Now. That purple book is a square,
yes.
all the patterns and drawings in there. I was like, whoa, this is a different kind of book. So when I read through his particular experience with psilocybin and how he dismantled his personality and saw all the identities that he thought he was step away from his body, but there was still something there. There was some point of awareness. That seemed to mesh with that weird vision I had when I was 16. Like, I saw entities I could become being not really the me that's me. And he was looking at entities he had become that didn't answer the question to him, what am I? What is this? What are we all about? And somehow that made a connection. I'm like, wow, there's something about this inquiry. I'm very intrigued. So I went through the book, and there's some ways to meditate in there. They teach you to do some yoga and stuff. And I dove right into it. And I sat in a little field. I went to Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, on the side of the Hudson River, and they had some beautiful landscape. And I sat there one time in the field, and I tried to do, I think it was pranayama yoga, where you breathe in the nose. And I tried a little bit of it, but just sitting there still. That was probably the first time in my life where I just sat still, not to watch a movie, not to just do nothing. And something about that was so satisfying. I like, wow, you can actually feel this way by doing nothing? What is this? So I got really excited, and I went to see my philosophy professor, and I said, I'm read this book and this crazy stuff's happening. He said, okay, okay, slow down. Here's a couple other books you should read. And he gave me Shunryu Suzuki's Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and Chogyam Trungpa's Spiritual Materialism. And so I read those, and the Shunryu Suzuki one had a much more, what I felt at the time, accessible meditation. Just sit there and watch your breath. Oh, I'll try that. And that really seemed to awaken something in me that felt like I'd returned someplace, that I'd come back to someplace that I'd never been. Like, how can I feel like I'm coming back to someplace I've never been? Just that stillness moment did something to me, affected me in a very profound way. So I, of course, started reading tons of books about Zen, and I thought it was this dead tradition. And oh, when the old days of too bad there's no more Zen masters around and blah blah blah. And I went to the bookstore in 1993, and there was a poster to see a Zen master Seung. And I was like, there's really Zen masters still alive. I was very naive and I didn't know what was going on. So I went to Providence Zen Center to see Zen Master Seung. And what was so interesting about that is at that time in my life, I had graduated college and I had a child. I was a father at age 22, 21.
Mm.
And that was very confusing. And I graduated with an English major. I was useless to the world, and I wasn't planning to do anything useful. I was going to go to India and learn Buddhism and Guruism and all that kind of stuff, and just throw myself into that world. But here I have this baby,
Mm.
and okay, what do I do? And it was very confusing, and I did become very angry. Not at the baby. I loved being a father. I adore my child, and he's 34 now, and I love him to death. I loved being a father, but I didn't like the idea of being a breadwinner and getting some meaningless career just to make money, and that's just disturbed me. And I didn't feel like I was getting the support I needed from the partner and all that stuff. And probably I was more to blame than her. Whatever, for whatever reason, I was very angry. So during a question and answer session with Sahn, I raised my hand and I asked, "What should I do with all this anger?" He looked me in the eye and through the crowd and he said, "Are you angry right now?" I said, "No, I'm not angry right now." He said, "Good. Next question." And I was completely bewildered. What the hell? What's going on here? So I kept coming back to the Providence Center. I told some of the people who were there saw that happen. They said, "Oh, he's been teaching us that we have stories in our mind,
Mm.
that is the source of some of our distress and suffering, and not the actual reality of the moment you're in." And it dawned on me, yes, I'm making up a huge story. This is unfair. I can't do this. And what? And I realized that the floor in front of me wasn't attacking me. The wind wasn't blowing me off the road. You know, I was very fortunate to be in the circumstance and I was in. There was no bombs being dropped on my head. I mean, I started to really re-look at what is actually happening and what are the tools to see what is actually happening, what to kind of not be dragged around by my story. So
Mm.
then I went regularly to the Providence Zen Center and practiced with them. And then I didn't realize I was living in Boston. I didn't know there was a Cambridge Zen Center. And they told me, "Where do you live?" "Oh, I live here." "Why did you go to the Cambridge Zen Center?" "It's right down to the red, like 3 stops away on the red line." So then I went to the Cambridge Zen Center and started with them. But then I had a very busy career, in special education, and I didn't. And then I got married. Then I had two more children. I was extremely busy, so I did not have a chance to get to formal practice at the Zen centers very frequently. But I had my own practice. I woke up regularly every morning, had a cushion, and I would sit in a part of my house and follow my breath or do a mantra. And I found that became such an anchor to all the circumstances that were going on in my life, that this still, quiet place was accessible. And if I had that habit or routine of going there and manifesting that place frequently, I made clear decisions in my life. I didn't get as hung up on nonsense. I still did, but I felt less pulled by those type of stories or situations, and was bit more able to just focus on the thing I was doing at the time. And I fell in love with teaching children with autism. They were kind of in a pure place of where they were in that moment. And it helped me say, "Oh, what, the wind is blowing, or the reflection on this glass, or the way this sound is in this situation." They're very sensory people. And that helped me really kind of get more in tune with that there are different levels of consciousness, there's different levels of awareness, and they're just in a different plane. And I need to recognize where they're at and then try to, obviously, some of the things they did wasn't very safe. And so that concerned me. So I would really teach my students not to, bite other people and express their emotions through that type of behavior. But the meditation just became such a home for me to go every day. And then as an older adult, later on in my career, my children, my next two children, one named Bodhi, Bodhi, and the other one Rilke, and after the poet,
Mm,
son is
yes.
Ethan. And so Bodhi and Rilke, their teenage years were very stressful for them, and guiding them through those years were very stressful for my wife and I. And so I really jumped into meditation. So I wasn't going to make choices that were unhealthy. There are many unhealthy choices we can make with frustrations, and we see it all around us. And I was like, maybe it didn't bring me to nirvana, but it just did kept me from not from going to samsara, from messing around with things I shouldn't mess around with. And then when things got very stressful around 2020, 2021, I the Zen Center was closed because of the COVID. And that's when I needed it the most. So I did an online retreat. And then I said, I got to get to the Zen Center. I kept going on the website to see when it was open again. And it turned out it had an apartment available at the Zen
Mm,
Center. I says to my son was going off to college, so he wasn't going to live with us. And I had my daughter and my wife, and I said, you guys, what do you think of this? We lived in a house in the suburbs. What if we moved to Cambridge, live in this little apartment, and et cetera, et cetera. And they said, okay. They're looking for a fresh start too, I guess. So we all moved to Cambridge, and then I really immersed. That was 2021, and then I really got into the daily practice. Every morning, waking up at 5:45, we do bows, we do chanting, we do sitting. There's a retreat every weekend, and that really, really helped me look at the stressors in my life and find a way to harmonize with them and not just be in this state of chaos. And I think I needed
beautiful.
that deep immersion into the practice. And so that really, really, it was wonderful. I really felt I had an outlet and a place to go, lit physically and spiritually. And
Mm,
so and then the teachers there really impressed me with how they taught and how they lived their lives. And we had a retreat a 2-day retreat every month. So after a while, I got into that, and I became the head Dharma teacher. And then the abbot, who's now our director, Barbara, a lovely, lovely woman, she said, I'm done with the abbot thing, and that job came up, and I was in a pretty high position at my old school, and I was kind of frustrated with it. I'd done it so long, and it was taxing, and I said, I'll apply for this and try this. So I leaped into this. And so I've been feeling my way through it for the past 2.5 years. I have great mentors and really wonderful people that are helping me out. But then we have 32 people living there. And you know what happens when humans live together. We have a saying, I guess in the Korean tradition, they say it's like cooking potatoes. When you put them all in the pot and they rub against each other, the dirt comes off quicker and you cook better. But that process involves heat, and sometimes there's conflict, and sometimes there's issues. And so I'm the one who not just keeps the plumbing running and electricity running, but tries to set the morale and the momentum, for the community. And I use a lot of the stuff I learned from my previous job, try to stay with predict, proact, prevent. Try to look at things in patterns and see if you can, you know, help move them before they become, bigger problems. And so it's been an adventure. Human beings are absolutely fascinating, exasperating. Being one can be all those things. Being myself can be exasperating. But the meditation is a place for to turn down the volume, to not have that incessant blah, 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 voices and ideas and stresses and pulls and just floor is brown, wall is white. How are you? It's time for breakfast. and live in a more purposeful, paced manner. And that's been, beautiful for me to watch others who are on this path and be inspired by them. And I'm a lifelong amateur. I can't say I'm an expert or pro at anything, but I'm up for the journey. And this is kind of a thumbnail sketch of kind of where I am and how I got here. So thanks for
Well, I
listening.
have to say,
Yeah.
you covered so many, practically all the questions I had
I'm
from the
sorry.
beginning.
I'm a
So
blabbermouth.
it's fascinating how this works. And when I have these discussions, I have a series of questions. I have a total of 26 questions that I select from and several areas. The first of which was human journey, Zen and becoming, family, work, and practice. And then, of course, you've covered those first three areas in a very beautiful arc. And so it's just, for me at least, I get to see behind the scenes how this unfolds. And so what I've learned from some of my own quasi mentors when it comes to having conversations such as this is that when you have a list of questions and that person is in a very natural, organic way answering those questions and unfolding as you would pose the questions, allow them to continue on the conversation because it
Baby.
unfolds in a very beautiful way. And so that's exactly what's happened here for this first segment. And I have to say thank you for that. But before we pivot to the meditation, what I'd like to do is to ask you the question, in your view, what does the modern world most need from contemplative traditions? Because you beautifully illustrated what it has done for you. Having the opportunity to return to that quiet space, having Master Sun Song pose a question to you in a moment. And afterward, you realize that no, I wasn't angry. And then recognizing that enfolded within the question was a teaching. What do you then see as being the value of contemplative traditions for our modern world, given the high levels of stress, particularly post-COVID that we've experienced both here and I'm sure you've experienced it as well, as you navigate your community? What do you see as the value of a contemplative tradition in our modern society?
Well, that's a really wonderful question and extremely important. The first thing that comes to mind is we're in an interesting part, and I don't know everything. I read news feeds and I talk to people, and certainly not an expert or a pro on everything that's going on in the world. But the basic sense I get is that we're kind of at a tipping point. That we figured out how to materially satisfy our needs. A typical American lives like a king. The pharaoh would call for water, and the servants would bring it up from the river, and we just turn a switch, and there it is. And we don't have to build a fire. We turn on the light, there it is, and we don't need to feed the horses. We just get in the car and it takes us. We've satisfied that, but people aren't happy. And we've tried politics. We're going to try this type of politics and that type of politics, and how we're going to arrange power and who has the power, and that doesn't seem to work. It creates more chaos and suffering. We're just keeping stuck in this loop. But I think what's really beautiful, at least hopeful about this time, is maybe because we've exhausted those, or seemingly have exhausted those futile attempts to find well-being as a human beings, that perhaps we're more open. I think in our tradition we say sometimes more suffering is necessary. And then I think the human beings have seen so many absolutely ridiculous ways to suffer. Horrible, horrendous. I mean, I shouldn't make fun of it. It's horrible. It's just unbelievable ways of hurting each other and harming each other. And we can clearly see the futility of what we've tried to do to mitigate that, politics or power or convenience or technology, that these contemplative traditions don't rely on any of that. And they give us, it's very, at first it's different. And when we talk with people about this, you have to be very careful because everyone can understand this. Everyone's had contemplative moments. Everyone's stared at a sunset or pet their dog or have had these moments of total awe and wonder and appreciation. And when we say that there's a technique to manifest more of that in your life, I think people tend to be more apt to say, yeah, let me give it a try. And I think perhaps that we may, as a human race, because every religion has a contemplative tradition, and there's Sufism and Kabbalah, and there's there's Zen and there's TM, and there's all these things that everyone in their own particular tradition could access if they just knew how to kind of understand where those energies go or come
Mm.
from. And I think it would be wonderful to see more and more people just just stop churning up so much energy in these futile things we've already seen a million times. We know the script. You're just going to put a new variation on this suffering script, and we kind of need to like unplug that and just calm the heck down. But people don't know how to calm down. I mean, I get wound up too. And so having this tool, there's many
Mhm.
ways to do it, to just release that attachment to I, me, mine, my story, my drama. But that can also be a tool to see other people's stories and other dramas and recognize their suffering and recognize their pain and recognize their confusion. And when you have that mutual recognition through a medium that's grounded in just the fact that you exist, can create, I think, an openness, to this the contemplative traditions or these practices. And the proof's in the pudding. Like so many people come to the Zen Center, the same as I did. I never sat still. I didn't know doing nothing or doing something very, very, very basic would have such a profound effect on your overall mood and attitude, towards
Mm.
life. And I think awakening compassion is a really important aspect of the spiritual journey, because when you think of, you know not obviously, it's like you probably heard this 100 times, where the analogy of being on an airplane and it's going down, put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you help someone else. Of course, you can't, if your shit isn't together, you're going to screw somebody else up as well. But right away, you feel a need to try to help people too. So we can help each other as long as we're very delicate, we're very open, and sincere. You don't have to be an enlightened Zen master or master or whatever. Part of the journey is discovering it together.
Mhm.
So that's an aspect I contemplate recently. Yeah.
Beautiful. And you highlight, several points, and it's something I think that having people become one aware that they have the capacity to have this interior experience and what can then be wrought by having had this experience and consistently practicing whatever tradition one practices, they all have value. They all bring something to the person who's practicing, but also to the immediate surroundings as well, and then has a positive effect that ripples out well beyond the individual. But it's something I think that you're absolutely right. And that as more people come to recognize their own lack of satisfaction with
Mm,
this whole material quest, and my wife and I were discussing it earlier today, of how when you come to understand you don't need a whole lot of stuff because you can't take stuff with you. What you take with you are those experiences that you've had along the way. And the real value comes in the experiences and not the acquisition of stuff. And that's where the contemplative practices allow a person to move beyond the materiality to that space of non-materiality, to that space
mm,
in the Vedic tradition that's often referred to as pure consciousness. Having that experience, you come to, as my dissertation advisor, Fred Travis would often say, you don't merely experience being, you become being, and you
mm.
come and bring that with you into the world. And with that, let us go ahead and prepare for our 20-minute all traditions meditation. For those of you who are with us for the first time, what I typically do here is we will pause the recording. We will have a 20-minute meditation. So whatever your tradition is, you practice the meditation for that 20 minutes. If it's a pranayama in terms of breathing, if it's asanas, if it's Zen, if it's an African tradition, whatever tradition you're practicing, Christian mysticism, Sufism, whatever your tradition is, you practice the meditation for the full 20 minutes. Once that's done, I will bring us out. We will sit quietly with the eyes closed for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then we'll resume the discussion on the opposite side. For those who have no tradition, what I'd like you to do is to contemplate the following prompt. How have I come to be who and what I am? Again, that prompt is, how have I come to be who and what I am? And you'll contemplate that. You don't want to judge the thoughts that surface during the meditation. You want them to be there, to observe them. And there may be a succession of thoughts surrounding how you've come to be who and what you are. Give attention to those. And once you come out of the meditation, document those and then begin contemplating them in your daily life. And you begin to expand your awareness of possibility beyond the present moment. Again, how have I come to be who and what I am? So again, for 20 minutes, we'll meditate together. All traditions meditation. I'll pause right now. It's always good to come out of a meditation and have that settled experience. I often view the first word within a meditation as being so important, and that's me. And me viewing it as my me time, it provides me the opportunity to move the attention in an inward direction, to just practice the technique, become completely oblivious to time and surroundings, and then emerge the better for having done so. And as a result of that, to your point earlier regarding having children and navigating people with their shenanigans, it doesn't mean that you don't become annoyed. It means you return to your baseline much more quickly. It means that when kids are being kids, you can reason with them in a very calm fashion and often make the best decisions possible. Because I often say we make our best decisions when we have clarity, yet our worst decisions are lacking clarity. And that's important. So thank you for joining us with that meditation. It's a privilege. Any thoughts, questions, reflections on that meditative experience from anyone?
That was actually very refreshing. I've been having a hectic time, so that was I needed that today. Oh, that was really, really excellent. Thank you.
Excellent. And are there any questions from those who are in attendance? Points of reflection? If not, I do have questions. I do have a series of questions I'd like to pose, but I do know we come up on our time and I like to respect everyone's time. So what I'd like to do is, given that Abbot John has shared a tremendous amount of his journey and just how, you know, Zen and his meditative practice has aided him in his life, and I'll ask him perhaps two last questions. Can inner transformation contribute to social transformation? So, Abbot John, please, can inner transformation contribute to social transformation? And if so, how do you see that being the case?
Whoa, that's a big one. That's a beautiful question because in investigating, possibility of ways to approach that in our lives, we could do so many wonderful things for, making this world a better place. I think just what you said, when we come out of the state of meditation, when everything's very quiet for some time, we can become so much more aware, be aware of our own feelings, our own emotions, and see the origins of them. And then it does elicit such an empathy in helping and relating to others. One very interesting, and what I really was intrigued by with these recent conferences, and something I hadn't been involved in a while, is how the new language of the contemporary world is often science, and that these scientists are now, confirming a lot of this ancient wisdom. And one of the interesting things, that as far as social transformation goes, just one quick experiment that I remember reading in my research is quite limited, but what's popping in my head right now is I remember reading this stuff about studying this Tibetan monk who they hooked all the electrodes to his head, and they analyzed his brain and all this kind of stuff, and seeing this growth in the more activity in the frontal lobe and the centers of empathy and awareness, and less activity in the amygdala, and all this kind of neuroscience. This one particular Tibetan monk, he lived in isolation for an extended period of time without any social involvement. And when he came out of his cave or wherever he was, they had him look at a series of people's faces from different cultures and races and backgrounds, and he was asked to say what emotion he believed that they were experiencing. And his accuracy was at such a high level, higher level than the psychologists who have been studying facial expressions for their career. And for some way, going into the inner world, he was able to understand others more than if he was with the others. And I thought that was such an amazing thing because if we can understand better others' emotions and feelings, we can relate to them better. And in a social context, there's less otherness. Oh, that person feels the way I feel. I've been that place too. There's basic connections of empathy. And I think from the science and from our own experiences, it's interesting. I've had a retreat, one of my worst retreat. It's hard to evaluate good, bad retreats. Well, I had one retreat where I was so unable to get to a calm place. I just kept working myself up and agitating myself more. I was like, ah. And it finally was over, and I had to run to the store. I'm a big kombucha fan, so I'm like, oh, I got to get some kombucha to wet my whistle after that retreat. And I go out to the store, and for some reason, I felt the most brotherly love feeling I've ever felt. Like I wanted to hug people on the streets.
Mhm.
And I'm like, why? I didn't feel any peace for the entire 2 days, but there's other parts of our experience that we're touching that we don't know about. They're mysterious, and but you can feel them manifest when you do this stuff more and more. So I think yes, for social transformation, if more people could access those states of being able to be more empathetic and understanding, we're gonna naturally find ways to come together. Yeah.
Beautiful. And that reminds me of a quote that comes from Rumi, where he says, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. When the
Yes. Yeah.
soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, languages, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. And
Yeah.
so he's highlighting just what you're saying of how when you have this, I would just call it a transcendent experience, when you go beyond all the surface stuff to recognize that fundamental unity, you walk around and you see within your fellow human travelers that which is within yourself. And to your point at the outset of that compassion developing, because you know, where but for the grace of the creator go I. You were there at one point, yet you're no longer there. And that compassion must develop within you because you see within others that quote other, you see yourself within them and them within you. And that's that
Mhm.
fundamental unity talked about when we were at the Conscious Future Society conference of me discussing that 7 layers of manifestation that I came up with after my doctoral defense of beginning with pure consciousness, then moving to the universal and natural laws, to the phenomenal world into which we're born. And the fulcrum between the phenomenal world and what I refer to as the human derived world is human consciousness, because we are part and parcel of that phenomenal world. And with our human consciousness, we give rise to, again, this human derived world, the constructs and the outcomes that we produce, highlighting that we have this within us. We have this, what one friend of mine referred to as a pinch of pure consciousness within us, and we can then bring that into the world around us to greater and greater effect. But we must first recognize that it's within us, and our multiple contemplative traditions move us in this direction to recognize this fundamental unity. So I want to thank you for sharing that. And perhaps this last question, if there is one insight from your decades of practice that you wished every person could directly experience for themselves, what would it be?
Clarity.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just it's actually similar to that Rumi poem. There's a point where, yeah, the symbols and the ideas and the words that we use to define what is happening move away.
Mm,
And there's this clarity beyond saying the word clarity.
mm,
And if I could give that gift, I think people would grow in their own unique ways from that space. But that clarity, that beyond symbols and ideas, just yeah, lying in that field and pop, you know.
mm. I think that's a perfect note to end on. So I want to say thank you, Abbot John from the Cambridge Zen Center, for being here with us today for this installment of the International Meditation Hour. I've enjoyed meeting you when, again, we met in April, then we followed up again in May, but it's been a joy to get to know you. It's a joy to have you here today. And I want to encourage all listeners to find a tradition that resonates with you. Follow resonance is what I like to say, and practice regularly to allow that quiet space that is resident within all of us to really come to serve as your calling card, if you will, your new way of being, your baseline, and then
Mm.
bring that into the world to greater and greater effect. Because as Abbot John highlighted at the outset, the world needs it now more than ever. And so each of us can play a role within bringing this about within our specific spheres of influence, and that then can overlap with other people doing likewise and bring about a much more harmonious, much more caring, much more, dare I say, compassionate world. So again, thank you for being here today for this installment of the International Meditation Hour. Again, my name is Dr. Baruti KMT-Sisouvong. It's been an honor, Abbot John. Thank you for being here.
It's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to working and getting to know you more, Dr. Brody. So thank you so much.